Good Jeep video, take two.
Hey, thanks for checking out the video. Today I'm going to show you exactly what it takes to fit 35s on your stock height factory suspension TJ. So let's get started. Alright, before I get started, I just want to address a few things. I am in no way saying that this is a good setup, or that this is a setup that you should try, or this setup is for anybody. In fact, it's not for everybody. This setup has its drawbacks, of course, mostly ground clearance and tire rubbing, which, as you can see by the tools in front of me today, we're going to be taking care of some of the clearance issues that I've experienced. So the goal of this video was simply to show you my experience with running 35s on factory suspension. In a minute, I'll take you out to the Jeep and we'll talk about everything I've done to the Jeep so far to run these 35s. And throughout the video, I'll discuss kind of, my experience with running the big tires, or, I guess a good sized tire. They're not considered big anymore. But my experience running those on this Jeep and kind of the places I've gone. But I can say this, so far it's been great. Drivability is fine, power is fine. There's definitely some rubbing issues. I'll address that here in a minute. But I've done a couple hard trails. You're also gonna see that I have the factory axles. So a low pinion Dana 30 and a Dana 35 in the rear. And I'm not saying that you should try running 35s on those axles either. I don't wanna be responsible for your idea that that's gonna work. Because if the internet and all the experts out there have told us anything, it's that you can't run 35s on those axles. Now, so far, they've held up for me. I have a locker even in the front and have done a couple 7 rated trails, and it's holding up. But at the same time, I understand that I might get 1 more trip out of it. I might get 100 more trips out of it. So your experience, your outcome is gonna vary. Not everybody's gonna get the same result. And I have a set of axles to build for this Jeep. So this setup has been a stepping stone for me. And I wanted to get onto 35s for as cheap as possible. And I'm kind of treating it like a science experiment. And you guys get to watch and see the result. So that's kind of fun for all of us, right? But the goal of this Jeep is 40-inch tires and stretched wheelbase and long arms and all the stuff that goes along with that. But for now, I didn't want to dump money into putting a lift kit on it and then it not be the right lift for the end goal. So essentially I've done a body lift, built some fenders, threw big tires on there, and I've been wheeling it like that. So yeah, this is not an ideal setup for everybody. I'm not even saying it's a good setup. Don't take this video and say, I can for sure do this, because the results are gonna vary. Your expectations are gonna set the mood for that, the tone for that. If you expect to have this perfect daily driver Jeep, then this might not be the setup for you. But if you're like me and you're looking for a cheap option to get on the 35s, while you save up parts and time and money to put into your ultimate build, then yeah, watch this video and maybe it's something you want to do. This is what we're dealing with so far. Here's Dingus, seen in my other videos. So this is stock suspension, 35-inch Canadi tires, rough country, a negative 19-inch offset wheels. And you can see I've built the high lines here to be able to clear in the front. It has a 1 1/4 inch rough country body lift on it, and it works like this. It actually works pretty good. Short list of things you need, you're gonna have to have clearance. So the high lines, the body lift helped with that, not 100% necessary. I was rubbing a little bit until I adjusted these stops here on the knuckle. And I was actually rubbing on this sway bar when it was connected. I disconnected it for our first big trip and I've just never reconnected it. With the stock suspension, the sway is not really that bad with this Jeep. So the front, I have plenty of clearance. I can flex out pretty good, but at full flex with the tire cranked, it does touch there. So the solution for this is too far gone for me. Eventually I'll be stretching this out. I think a lift would help with that too. But the easy fix would be when you build your high lines or your fortunate enough to be able to buy some. A lot of those actually come all the way back to this corner. Instead of mine, you can see it sits far forward because this is the factory fender that I just moved up and then built a flare for it. So if you buy one, this piece right here is not going to be here, and you probably won't have that clearance issue. The clearance issues are in the rear. So you can see, well, maybe not on the camera, but this whole corner right here has been rubbed smooth of the paint. And you got this seam in here, and that's all catching the tire, and I'm rubbing a bit in the rear at full stuff. So I have a few options back here. Today I'm gonna trim this, and I'll show that on camera. And I might throw like a 1-inch bump stop in there. I'm able to get this tire clear up into the top of the wheel well. Yeah, you can see it's rubbed a little bit up there. So a bump stop's probably beneficial. But mostly the rubbing doesn't bother me, except for it's starting to take some nicks out of the tire, and that's mostly the sheet metal back here. So I'm gonna jack up this corner and see where it's touching, and then I'm gonna take a flapper disc and a hammer and do some clearancing. All right, so I ground down a fair bit there. Now I'm just gonna go through and show it some love. So I gave the front a good whack with that hammer. I got all that bent up into place. I was a little worried about this box kind of feature that this has, but there's a drain hole on the other side. I tapped in a little bit on this wheel well. I don't know what you'd call that. You know, the little piece of angle that sticks in. And I have that sanded back. I'll probably work at it just a little bit more and then throw some paint on it. Clean it up and throw some paint on it. And then in the rear, I went ahead and just eyeballed a line that I'm gonna cut. All right. Here's the chunk I cut off the back. Went through and hammered the front a little bit more. Threw a quick coat of paint on it. It's not like prepped or anything because I'm gonna go out this weekend and flex it around and see if it's rubbing still. And of course I still have to do the other side. Soon I want to, you know, clean up all this wheel well and put an actual coat of paint on it. But right now that's not the priority. All right, so I thought it would be beneficial to cover a few things like miles per gallon, overall drivability, and power loss with the 35s on the factory 373 gears. So as far as fuel mileage goes, I was consistently getting 11 or 12 with the 31s, bumped up to 35s, changed nothing else, and I consistently get 9 to 10 now. So not a huge loss, definitely nothing to brag about. But this is definitely a miles per gallon type rig, not a miles per gallon rig. Overall drivability is really good. Mostly I stay around town. Very few times am I jumping on the highway. So, you know, we're talking 0 to 45 miles an hour typically. And it has plenty of get up and go, but at the same time, my expectations are low. I've been driving underpowered, oversized tired, under-geared Jeeps for years now, and I've just grown accustomed to the loss of power. So if you're someone who's going to compare it to, you know, their pickup on 33s or 32s or whatever, yeah, jumping in a 4-liter TJ with 373 gears and 35s probably isn't going to feel like a powerhouse, but it doesn't need to be, right? As far as off-road goes, you throw it in 4 low, it has plenty of gearing. Fuel light just came on. So in a minute I'm going to turn you around. We're going to take off down the road, and I'm going to show you kind of where the RPMs are at for different, you know, miles per hour. And keep in mind, my speedometer's off a little bit because I never changed the gear in the transmission to make it read right. That reminds me, the fuel mileage calculation might be off a little bit too, considering I am also you know, calculating off of an odometer that is going to be off a little bit too. So let me turn you around. We're going to take off down the road and I'll show you the kind of RPMs we're dealing with. Okay, so there wasn't really a good way to rig up this camera. I don't have you straight on, and I didn't want to just hold it while I was driving down the road. So I got it rigged up to one of my levers on the steering column here. So it's not straight on, it's a little wobbly. Anyway, I'm pulling up to a stop sign right now. I'm gonna pull out in the traffic like I would normally and show you what the power looks like. So we're about 2,500 RPM, shifted a bit up, and then RPM dropped. We're going about 30 miles an hour at 2,000 RPM. I'll go ahead and floor it for you guys. We're on a slight incline. Plenty of get up and go. Now we're approaching a pretty steep grade. Slow down around the corner, and then I'm gonna floor it going up this steep hill. Not a powerhouse, but I mean, it does just fine, and it increases speed as you want it to up the hill. I would say the biggest drawback is, if you can see the tack right now, what it just did is it likes to shift up, and then you kind of lose your power band there. So you have a manual, this, you'd probably be golden. I have the automatic in here. I'm in drive. I pretty much always keep the overdrive off, and that seems to help, but it does shift sometimes when you don't want it to, especially out on the highway. But overall, for driving around town and out into the woods and stuff, it does just fine. Off-road, throw it in 4 low, you can crawl around as much as you want. So overall, pretty good if you ask me. All right, I know a lot of people are gonna say that, you know, no lift is not gonna be enough flex. Not enough clearance for 35s, or even like a 2-inch lift, but, and I gotta say, with the exception of the lack of ground clearance for getting over obstacles, that's a lot of flex right there. Got plenty of clearance around this front. In case you missed it, I do have a video on making those high lines. If you want to make something similar, go check that out. Well, that looks perfect. There's about a 1/4 inch gap right there. That's about as much flex as I'm gonna get out of this. I pulled the front tire off the ground when I pulled it up on the forklift here. So this side looks good. Check the rear. Yeah, I got clearance all the way around. So I know that, you know, with the tire aired down and the way it moves up and down on rocks and stuff and flexes and moves around obstacles, that I probably will touch a little bit unless I bump stop. I'm not gonna worry about bump stopping for now, but that's okay if it does touch, as long as it's not rubbing. Like, I probably shared a clip already where I was going over an obstacle and it was, you know, every few seconds as it hit. So as long as it's touching and not doing any damage to anything, then I'm fine with a little bit of rubbing and, you know, grabbing the spray can and touching it up. On the other side, I am pretty sure that I didn't trim this back far enough. So I think, well, with it sitting like this, I might hammer it and grind a little more while I'm at it. Really happy with how this side turned out. My passenger side, I got a little impatient and my lines aren't as good, but this works out really well. Yeah, so personally, the outcome of this has been pretty good for me. It wheels great, it drives great around town. I'm pretty happy with it. like I said, my end goal is not 35s on this Jeep. They're just a stepping stone. So if I were to be building this Jeep for 35s, I would pretty much do the same setup, but I would add like a 2.5-inch suspension lift and some adjustable control arms, at least in the rear, so I could stretch that wheelbase like an inch to avoid that rubbing back there. And if I were sticking with the 35s, I would also be adding like a tummy tuck, because, and maybe like a fuel cell, because what you're gonna see is that a lot of my problems is with ground clearance. On our wheeling trip, there was another Jeep. It was on a 4-inch lift. It was on 33s, and he did pretty much all the same obstacles as I did. The 35s definitely were an improvement for some of the obstacles, but I was so low that I noticed I'd come over something and rub, you know, my fuel tank skid or my belly pan, and he wouldn't. So the lift is beneficial. Oh, and I almost forgot, with the ultimate setup, if I were sticking with 35s, I'd be switching the axles to like a high pinion Dana 30 out of an XJ, and I really like the Ford 8.8 that I had in my last XJ, so I'd probably put one of those in the rear of this, or a Dana 44 out of a TJ. So definitely a little bit stronger axles to run those tires reliably. So I'm really hoping to avoid all the upset comments and the "you can't do that" comments. This is just my experience, and so far it's worked pretty well for me. Running the stock suspension with the other additions I've done has allowed me to have a decently capable rig, and it gives it a nice aggressive stance. I like the 35s with the high lines, and I think if I had any more lift right now, that wheel opening would be too big for my liking. So this is a pretty good setup, but like I said, I'm not telling you that you need to run this setup or that you should try running this setup. This is just my experience, something I wanted to share with everybody. To summarize, there's a few things you can do to your TJ to run 35s on the stock suspension, including body lift, high lines, and lots of trimming. Well, really, it wasn't that much trimming, to be honest. So far, the rear looks like it's gonna be good. I did go ahead and re-clearance this passenger side, and I think it's gonna fit now. Go ahead and watch some of my previous wheeling videos and tell me that this thing doesn't do decent for what it is. Now, I'm not saying, remember, I'm not saying don't put a lift kit on your Jeep. I'm gonna put a lift kit on this eventually. But for now, with the 35s, this does pretty good. It's hard to argue with that flex right there that this isn't gonna be decent. As always, thanks for watching and supporting the channel. I really do appreciate it. It's been awesome to watch the subscriber count go up. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. It does help me out, and I really appreciate it. So, as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.